My name is Ansel, a 68-year-old retired engineer from Boston. My only son, Thomas, was my world after losing my beloved wife. When I moved in with Thomas and his wife, Jessica, I thought I was entering a safe harbor for my final years. I never expected that one day Jessica would look me in the eyes, tell me my son was dead, and order me out of their home within 3 days. The worst part? My son was very much alive. Before I tell you how I uncovered this cruel deception, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want justice served cold. Life had been good to me for the most part. I spent 40 years married to my wonderful Eleanor, raised our son Thomas to be a decent man, and enjoyed a fulfilling career as an electrical engineer for a major telecommunications company. We had built a modest but comfortable life in our small suburban home outside Boston, with plans to travel during our retirement years. Those plans crumbled when Eleanor was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. Within 6 months, she was gone, leaving a void in my life that nothing could fill. Thomas was my rock during that difficult period. He would drive 3 hours from his home every weekend just to make sure I was eating properly and taking my medications for my high blood pressure and arthritis. "Dad, I worry about you all alone in this big house," Thomas said one Sunday evening as he prepared to drive back to his home. "The stairs are getting harder for you, and winter is coming. Remember how you slipped on the ice last year?" I brushed off his concerns. "I can manage just fine. Your mother and I lived here for 35 years. Every corner of this house holds memories." But the truth was, Thomas wasn't wrong. My health had been declining since Eleanor's passing. My arthritis was getting worse, making home maintenance increasingly difficult. The property taxes were also becoming a burden on my fixed retirement income. Thomas was a successful software developer who had married Jessica 5 years earlier. I still remember their wedding day fondly. Jessica had seemed so lovely then, with her bright smile and attentiveness to Thomas. She had even hugged me tightly and whispered, "I promise to make him happy, Ansel." At family gatherings, Jessica was always polite and engaging. She would ask about my engineering projects and listen with what seemed like genuine interest. Thomas clearly adored her, and I was happy he had found someone who complimented him so well. "Dad," Thomas said during one of his visits, "Jessica and I have been talking. We have that big 4-bedroom house with just the 2 of us. The guest bedroom on the first floor has its own bathroom. Why don't you sell this place and come live with us? No stairs, no maintenance, and we could see each other every day." The offer was tempting, but I hesitated. "I don't want to impose on you two. Newlyweds need their privacy." Thomas laughed. "Dad, we've been married for 5 years now. Hardly newlyweds." When Thomas brought up the idea to Jessica during a video call that evening, I noticed her smile tighten slightly before she said, "Of course, Ansel should come stay with us. Family takes care of family." After several more discussions and a visit to their spacious suburban home, I agreed to the arrangement. Jessica laid out some house rules during my tour. Certain areas would be their private space. I would need to give advance notice before inviting friends over, and we would split household chores according to ability. "These all sound reasonable," I said, grateful for the opportunity. "I want to contribute, not be a burden." I sold my house for a good price in the hot real estate market, putting most of the money into my retirement account but keeping some liquid for emergencies. Thomas helped me sort through decades of possessions, deciding what to keep, donate, or sell. I insisted on bringing certain family heirlooms: Eleanor's antique china set, my father's hand-carved chess table, and photo albums chronicling our family history. Moving day was emotional but exciting. Thomas and I spent hours arranging my new room to make it feel like home, while Jessica supervised the placement of the few pieces of furniture I had brought for common areas. She seemed particular about where things went, often moving items I had placed to different positions. "The reading lamp works better over here," she would say. Or, "This side table clashes with our decor in that corner." Thomas always jumped in with compromises. "How about we put it here instead, Dad? It gets good natural light and doesn't block the walkway." Those first few weeks were an adjustment period for everyone. I tried to be helpful around the house, tending to the garden, cooking occasional meals, and fixing minor issues like leaky faucets or squeaky hinges. Jessica initially expressed appreciation for these contributions. Thomas never gets around to these little repairs, she said one afternoon as I fixed the garbage disposal. It's nice having a handyman in the house, but I began noticing subtle signs of tension. Jessica would sigh loudly when I watched television in the living room, even with the volume low. She would rearrange the kitchen after I cooked, implying I had left it disorganized. Thomas always played mediator, defending both sides equally. Dad likes his shows in the evening, Jessica. It's only for an hour, he would say. Or, Dad, Jessica has a certain way she likes the spice rack organized. It helps her when she's cooking. Despite these minor frictions, I grew attached to their home. My room overlooked the backyard garden I had begun nurturing. The neighborhood was quiet and safe, with pleasant walking paths where I could get my daily exercise. Thomas and I established a routine of morning coffee together before he left for work, catching up on each other's lives. I felt secure for the first time since losing Eleanor. If only I had recognized the subtle warning signs that this security was built on shifting sands. About 3 months after I moved in, Thomas began traveling more frequently for work. His software company had landed major contracts with international clients, requiring his presence for installations and training. At first, these trips lasted only a few days, but gradually extended to weeks at a time. This is a huge opportunity, Dad, Thomas explained as he packed for a 2-week trip to Singapore. If these projects go well, I might be looking at a major promotion. I was proud of my son's success, but concerned about being alone with Jessica for extended periods. The dynamic between us shifted dramatically whenever Thomas left. The warm, if somewhat reserved, daughter-in-law would transform into a cold, dismissive presence who barely acknowledged me except to issue complaints. During one of Thomas's early trips, I was watching a baseball game in the living room when Jessica stormed in. "Could you please keep it down? I can hear that all the way upstairs in my office," she snapped. I immediately reduced the volume. "Sorry, Jessica. I didn't realize it was so loud." She stood there, arms crossed. "And do you really need all these lights on? The electricity bill is going to be through the roof." From then on, I took to watching television with headphones and retreated to my room earlier and earlier each evening. I started taking longer walks around the neighborhood just to avoid being in the house when Jessica was home. The incidents multiplied. Jessica complained about the smell when I cooked my traditional beef stew, a recipe Eleanor had perfected over decades. "Could you maybe not make such pungent foods? The smell gets into the curtains." She objected when I invited my old colleague Franklin over for chess. "Next time, I need at least 3 days' notice before you have guests. This is my home too, and I need to prepare." When Thomas would call to check in, Jessica would hover nearby, sometimes even putting the phone on speaker. If I mentioned any tensions, she would jump in with her version of events, often painting me as confused or overly sensitive. Thomas, trying to keep peace from thousands of miles away, would gently encourage compromise on both sides. "Dad, Jessica works from home. She needs quiet during her calls." Or, "Jessica, remember Dad's hearing isn't what it used to be. He doesn't realize how loud the TV is sometimes." One evening, I accidentally overheard an argument between Thomas and Jessica. I had gotten up for a glass of water and was passing their partially open door when Jessica's raised voice caught my attention. "We cannot keep draining our savings for that lake house down payment," she was saying. "Not with your father living here rent-free." "He's not living here rent-free," Thomas responded. "He contributes to groceries and utilities. And he's my father. Jessica, where else would he go? We had plans before he moved in. Now everything is on hold. And you're always traveling while I'm stuck playing nursemaid." I silently returned to my room, heart heavy. I had no idea they were saving for a lake house, or that my presence was preventing this dream. The next morning, I casually brought up the idea of paying formal rent to Thomas over our coffee. "Where is this coming from, Dad?" Thomas asked, looking concerned. "I just want to make sure I'm contributing fairly," I said, not wanting to admit I'd overheard their private conversation. Thomas shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. This is your home now." As the months passed, I noticed more signs of Jessica's expensive tastes and spending habits. She frequently returned home with shopping bags from luxury stores. A brand new luxury SUV replaced her perfectly functional car. She spoke often about friends vacationing in exotic locations, with obvious envy in her voice. Meanwhile, I began to realize she was monitoring my phone calls with Thomas. Once, when Thomas was in Japan for 3 weeks, I mentioned to him that the refrigerator seemed to be making an unusual noise. The next morning, Jessica confronted me. "If there are maintenance issues, you should tell me first, not complain to Thomas while he's working halfway across the world." "I wasn't complaining," I explained. "It just came up in conversation." She gave me a cold look. "He called me at 3 in the morning because he was worried about it." After that, I noticed that my private conversations with Thomas became increasingly rare. Jessica would always find reasons to be present, or Thomas would be in meetings when I asked to speak with him alone. Nearly 8 months after I moved in, Thomas announced he had been assigned to a major 6-month project in Dubai. It would be his longest assignment yet, with limited communication due to security protocols at the client site and the 12-hour time difference. "This is a career-making opportunity, Dad," Thomas explained, eyes bright with excitement. "The compensation package is incredible. Maybe we can finally get that lake house Jessica has been dreaming about." Our goodbye at the airport was emotional. I hugged my son tightly, fighting back tears. "Take care of yourself over there. Don't work too hard," I said, patting his back. "I'll call whenever I can," Thomas promised, "and I'll be back before you know it." Surprisingly, Jessica was unusually attentive during this farewell, holding Thomas's hand and kissing him deeply before he went through security. She even put her arm through mine as we walked back to the parking lot. "We'll get through this together, Ansel," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's just you and me now." Those words would take on a sinister meaning in the months to come. The first sign of trouble came when Thomas missed our planned video call 1 week into his trip. Jessica explained he had sent her a message about unexpected meetings. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry and will try again next week," she said, not looking up from her phone. When the next scheduled call was also missed, I asked to see the messages Thomas had sent. Jessica claimed they had spoken by phone instead. "The connection there is terrible for video calls. He barely had time to speak with me," she explained. Communication with my son became increasingly sparse. Jessica always had explanations: security protocols, technical difficulties, schedule changes. When I did get to speak with Thomas, the calls were brief, often with poor connections, and always with Jessica present. He seemed distracted and tired, our conversations superficial. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. The unease grew within me like a shadow, stretching longer as the days passed. 2 months into Thomas's overseas assignment, I was reading in my room when I heard a crash from the kitchen. I rushed out to find Jessica standing amidst broken glass, her hands trembling. Her face was streaked with tears, her usual composure completely shattered. "Jessica, what happened? Are you hurt?" I approached carefully, concerned by her unusual display of emotion. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Sit down, Ansel. Please. I need to tell you something." A chill ran through me as I lowered myself into a chair at the kitchen table. Jessica took several deep breaths before joining me, her movements mechanical and stiff. "There's been an accident," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In Dubai, at Thomas's project site." My heart seemed to stop. "What kind of accident? Is Thomas okay?" Jessica's face crumpled. "No, Ansel, he's not okay. There was a structural collapse at the construction site where they were installing the systems. Thomas was killed, instantly." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The kitchen seemed to spin around me. "No," I managed to gasp. "No, that can't be right. There must be some mistake." Jessica reached across the table to grasp my hand. "I got the call from his company 2 hours ago. They confirmed it was him. I've been trying to process it myself before telling you, but I just spoke to him last week." I protested weakly, though in truth it had been closer to 3 weeks since our last brief, static-filled conversation. "I know this is impossible to accept," Jessica continued, withdrawing her hand. "The company is handling all the arrangements. Because of where it happened, they said the body can't be returned." Something about international regulations and the condition. Her voice broke. I barely heard the rest of what she said. My mind was fragmented, unable to process this devastating information. My only child, my son, my Thomas, gone. It couldn't be real. The next few days passed in a blur of numbing grief. Jessica moved with surprising efficiency, arranging a memorial service with remarkable speed. When I asked about death certificates or official documentation, she explained the international complications. The company is handling everything through their legal team, she said. They're expediting the process out of respect for Thomas's position, but there's still a lot of red tape. I'll show you all the paperwork when it comes. I nodded dumbly, too overwhelmed by grief to question the unusual circumstances. Yet some small part of my engineer's mind noted inconsistencies. Why hadn't Thomas's direct supervisor called me? Why was there no news coverage of a major construction accident? Why were details so sparse? The memorial service was held just 5 days after Jessica delivered the news. It was a small affair at a local funeral home, with no body present, just a large photograph of Thomas and a few floral arrangements. I was struck by how few of Thomas's actual friends were in attendance. His college roommate Brian was noticeably absent, as were several close colleagues I had met over the years. Those who did attend seemed oddly uncertain about details. When I spoke with Thomas's department head, Carl, the conversation left me confused. Such a tragedy, and so sudden, I said, seeking confirmation or additional information. Carl looked momentarily perplexed. Yes, very sudden. Jessica has been so strong through it all. Were you notified immediately after the accident? I asked. A flicker of something crossed Carl's face. We received word through proper channels. If you'll excuse me, I need to speak with someone. Other conversations followed similar patterns. People expressed condolences but seemed vague on specifics. One colleague even asked me about funeral arrangements in Dubai, which contradicted Jessica's story about no local services. Jessica remained composed throughout the memorial, accepting condolences with dignified grief. She delivered a brief but emotional tribute to Thomas, speaking of their plans and dreams now shattered. It was the picture of a devastated widow, yet something felt performative about her sorrow. As guests departed, I overheard a snippet of conversation between Jessica and someone I didn't recognize. Everything is proceeding as discussed, the man said quietly. The papers just need your signature. Jessica nodded. I'll come by tomorrow. Make sure everything is in order. These oddities registered dimly through my grief. Like distant warning bells I couldn't quite hear clearly. I was simply too overwhelmed by the loss of my son to connect the troubling dots. That evening, as the last guests left, I sat alone in the living room staring at Thomas's photo. Jessica had been warm and supportive while others were present, bringing me water, guiding me to seats, speaking for me when I was too choked with emotion to respond to condolences. But as the front door closed behind the final visitor, a transformation occurred. Jessica's gentle, concerned expression hardened into something cold and unfamiliar. She began briskly collecting glasses and plates, no longer the grieving widow but someone with a task to complete. You should get some rest, Ansel, she said, not meeting my eyes. It's been a difficult day for everyone. I nodded, too exhausted to do anything but comply. As I shuffled toward my room, a strange thought surfaced through my grief. Jessica had not shed a single tear once we were alone. The evening after the memorial service changed everything. I had spent most of the day in my room, looking through old photographs of Thomas growing up. Each image was a knife to my heart. Thomas taking his first steps. Thomas proudly holding up a science fair ribbon. Thomas in his college graduation gown, arm around my shoulders while Eleanor beamed beside us. Around 7 o'clock, there was a sharp knock at my bedroom door. Jessica entered without waiting for a response. Her face set in hard lines I had never seen before. Ansel, we need to talk, she said, remaining standing though there was a chair nearby. She was dressed in business attire, as if heading to an important meeting rather than mourning her husband. Of course, I said, setting aside the photo album. What is it? I know this is difficult timing, she began, her voice devoid of the sympathy it had held at the memorial service. But there are practical matters that need addressing now that Thomas is gone. I nodded, assuming she wanted to discuss financial arrangements or perhaps Thomas's personal belongings. The fact is, she continued, this house legally belongs to me now. I blinked in confusion. What do you mean? You and Thomas bought it together. Jessica reached into a folder she was carrying and removed a document, placing it on the bed beside me. Thomas transferred the house solely into my name before he left for Dubai, for tax purposes. Similarly, our joint accounts are now mine. I picked up the paper, scanning it with growing disbelief. It appeared to be a deed with Jessica listed as the sole owner. The document looked official, but something about it struck me as odd, though in my emotional state I couldn't pinpoint what. I don't understand, I said. Thomas never mentioned this. It was handled quickly before his departure. Jessica replied dismissively. But the point is, I need to make arrangements for my future now. And those arrangements don't include continuing to house my deceased husband's father. The bluntness of her statement hit me like a slap. What are you saying? I'm saying you have 3 days to make other living arrangements, Ansel. By Friday, I need you gone. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. 3 days? Jessica, my son just died. I have nowhere to go. All my money from selling my house went into my retirement account. Jessica's expression remained unmoved. That's not my concern. Thomas made provisions for you in his will, I'm sure. But this house is mine, and I need to move forward with my life. Can I see the will? I asked, a strange suspicion beginning to form through my grief. The lawyers are still processing everything, she said quickly. International complications, as I mentioned. But it doesn't change the fact that you need to find other accommodations. I stood up, my legs unsteady. Jessica, please. I'm 68 years old. I just lost my only child. You can't possibly expect me to just pack up and leave with nowhere to go. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. I understand this is difficult, she said, her tone suggesting she understood nothing of the kind. But frankly, Thomas was supporting both of us. Without his income, I can't afford to house and feed an elderly dependent. You should look into senior living facilities or contact social services. The coldness of her words stunned me. Elderly dependent? Jessica, I've been contributing to this household. I've cooked, cleaned, maintained the garden. Thomas and I had an understanding. Jessica's laugh was harsh, an understanding that died with him. Let's be realistic, Ansel. You're nearly 70 with health problems. You'll need more care, not less, in coming years. I'm 34 and need to rebuild my life. I can't be expected to become your caretaker. I've never asked you to be my caretaker, I protested, anger beginning to cut through my grief. Not yet, she said with a pointed look, but it was only a matter of time. Thomas was too soft-hearted to see it, but I always knew where this was heading. Look, I could have just called the police and had you removed, but out of respect for Thomas, I'm giving you time to make arrangements. I sank back onto the bed, my mind reeling. This isn't right. Thomas would never want this. Jessica moved toward the door. Thomas isn't here to want anything anymore. The house is legally mine, and I need you out by Friday. If you're not gone by then, I will call the police and report you as a trespasser. She paused at the doorway. I suggest you start packing tonight. After she left, I sat motionless, trying to process what had just happened. The grief of losing Thomas collided with this new betrayal, creating a storm of emotions I could barely contain. I buried my face in my hands and wept, more alone than I had ever felt in my life. But as the initial shock subsided, something else began to stir within me. Questions that had been dormant suddenly demanded attention. Why had Thomas transferred the house solely to Jessica without telling me? Why was there so little official documentation about his death? Why had the memorial service been so hasty and small? Through my tears, I began to think like the analytical engineer I had been for 40 years. When components fail, you don't just replace them blindly. You troubleshoot, you investigate, you find the root cause. And something about this situation wasn't adding up. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. If Jessica wanted me gone in 3 days, I would appear to comply. I would act the part of the defeated old man packing his meager belongings. But behind that facade, I would be observing, documenting, and investigating. That night, I retrieved my old smartphone from the drawer where it had sat unused since I moved in. Thomas had insisted on getting me a newer model, but I had kept this one as a backup. I checked that it still charged and had recording capability. Then I placed it strategically in my shirt pocket, making sure the camera lens was unobstructed. Two can play at this game, Jessica, I whispered to myself as I finally lay down to sleep. You see a grieving old man too broken to fight back, but you've gravely underestimated who you're dealing with. The next morning, I began my investigation while outwardly preparing for departure. I moved slowly around the house, placing small boxes of belongings near the front door, making sure Jessica saw my apparent compliance with her demand. Each time she observed me packing, I would slump my shoulders and wipe at imaginary tears. I've called a few places, I told her over a tense breakfast, recording our conversation with the phone in my pocket. But most senior apartments have waiting lists of months, not days. Jessica barely looked up from her tablet. That's why I suggested social services. They can find emergency placement. At my age, starting over is hard, I continued, watching her reactions carefully. Thomas always said I would never have to worry about housing again. At the mention of Thomas's name, Jessica's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her coffee mug. Thomas made a lot of promises he couldn't keep, she said curtly. To both of us. I suppose the life insurance will help you manage, I ventured, testing a theory. Jessica's eyes darted to mine, then away. The policy isn't as substantial as you might think, and there are complications with international deaths. It could be months before anything is settled. Interesting. No mention of the substantial policy I knew Thomas had through his employer. Another inconsistency to add to my growing list. When Jessica left for an appointment that afternoon, I began searching the house systematically. I started with the obvious places Thomas might have kept important documents: his home office desk, filing cabinets, the safe in their bedroom closet. I found the combination to the safe in Thomas's desk drawer, written in his distinctive handwriting on a small card. Inside the safe were jewelry, some cash, and various documents, but nothing related to property transfers or a will. As I was closing the safe, I noticed something odd about the closet's back panel. It seemed to have been recently moved. Pressing against it revealed a hidden compartment containing Thomas's laptop computer. Why would Jessica hide Thomas's laptop rather than disposing of it if he were truly dead? I took it to my room and powered it on, grateful that I knew Thomas's password pattern. He always used variations of significant family dates, and I tried several combinations before gaining access. The email account was still logged in, and what I found sent chills down my spine. There were recent emails from Thomas to Jessica, dated well after his supposed death. The most recent was from just 3 days ago. Everything's on schedule here. The system implementation is going well, despite some challenges with local regulations. Should be home as planned in 4 months. Miss you both. How's Dad holding up with me away so long? I sat back, my hands trembling. Thomas was alive. Jessica had fabricated his death entirely. But why? I continued searching through the laptop, methodically examining financial records, emails, and documents. In the financial folders, I discovered troubling transactions. Large sums had been transferred from their joint accounts to an account in Jessica's name only, beginning shortly after Thomas left for Dubai. The transfers had accelerated in the weeks leading up to my eviction. I also found draft documents for the property transfer Jessica had shown me, but they were unsigned templates, not completed legal documents. She had shown me a forgery. As I dug deeper, another disturbing pattern emerged. Jessica had been corresponding regularly with Brian, Thomas's old college friend. But these weren't innocent exchanges between friends. They were intimate messages, filled with explicit content and plans for a future together. Once the old man is gone, and we've sold the house, we can look at properties in California. Jessica had written just yesterday. Thomas's life insurance claim is being processed. Between that and the retirement accounts, we'll have plenty to start fresh. The betrayal was staggering. Not only was Jessica having an affair and planning to steal Thomas's assets, but she had fabricated his death to accelerate her plans. and I was an inconvenient obstacle to be removed. I carefully copied key emails and documents to a USB drive I found in Thomas's desk. Then I restored the laptop exactly as I had found it and returned it to the hidden compartment. That evening, I set up my phone to record in the living room while pretending to make calls about housing options. As expected, Jessica eventually came in to check on my progress. "Any luck finding somewhere to go?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Not yet." I sighed heavily. "Everything is so expensive these days. I might need a little more time, Jessica." She shook her head firmly. "Friday means Friday, Ansel. I have people coming to look at the house next week. I'm planning to sell." "So soon after Thomas's passing?" I asked, watching her closely. "Life goes on," she replied coldly. "I can't stay in this house filled with memories. Too painful." "I understand," I said, feigning sympathy. "Loss affects us all differently. By the way, did Thomas ever mention updating his will before he left? He had talked to me about making sure I was provided for." Jessica's expression shifted subtly. "He mentioned it, but I don't think he got around to it. As I said, the lawyers are still sorting everything out." "Of course," I nodded. "And his company? Have they been in touch about benefits? I worked in corporate for 40 years, and usually there's quite a substantial package for families when an employee dies overseas." Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why all these questions, Ansel? You should be focusing on finding new housing, not worrying about my financial affairs." "Just trying to make sure everything's being handled properly," I said mildly. "Thomas would want us both taken care of." After she left the room, I checked my phone. The entire conversation was recorded clearly, with Jessica's evasions and contradictions preserved. Later that night, I was awakened by voices. Jessica was speaking to someone in the kitchen. I crept down the hallway, phone recording in hand. "He's getting suspicious," Jessica was saying, asking questions about the will and insurance. A male voice responded, which I recognized as Brian's. "Just stick to the plan. Once he's gone Friday, we move everything valuable out over the weekend. The real estate agent already has buyers interested. With the market so hot, we could close within weeks. What if he refuses to leave? He keeps hinting he needs more time." "Then we do it the hard way," Brian replied. "Call the cops, claim he's trespassing or confused. Play the grieving widow card. Nobody questions a woman who just lost her husband. I just wish Thomas hadn't insisted on bringing him here in the first place," Jessica complained. "He's been nothing but a burden." "Well, in 3 days he's somebody else's burden," Brian said, "and we'll be set for a very comfortable new beginning." I had heard enough. I returned to my room and sat in the darkness, planning my next move. I now had solid evidence of Jessica's deception and scheme, but I needed to be strategic. If I confronted her directly, she might destroy evidence or accelerate her plans. The next morning, I sent an email directly to Thomas at his work address, something Jessica would not have access to. I explained everything that had happened and attached some of the evidence I had gathered. Then I settled in to wait, continuing the charade of the compliant father-in-law preparing to leave. By now, I had a plan forming. Jessica believed she was dealing with a defeated old man. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. On the morning of my supposed final day in the house, I received a brief email from Thomas. "Got your message. Coming home immediately. Arriving tonight around 8. Don't confront Jessica until I'm there. Stay safe, Dad." Relief flooded through me. Thomas was indeed alive, had received my warning, and was on his way home. Now I just needed to keep Jessica's suspicions at bay for a few more hours. I spent the day making a show of packing my remaining belongings and making phone calls that went nowhere. Jessica checked on me periodically, her impatience barely concealed. "I've called a rideshare service for 6 tomorrow morning," she informed me during one such visit. "I've booked you a room at the Budget Inn for a week. That should give you time to make more permanent arrangements." "That's thoughtful," I managed to say, swallowing my disgust at her false generosity. "I'm not heartless, Ansel," she said with practiced sympathy. "I just need to move forward with my life." Around 7 that evening, as Jessica was upstairs, I received a text from Thomas. "Landed early. At neighbor Jim's house now. Police detective with me. Come outside casually in 5 minutes." My heart pounding, I put on my jacket and called up to Jessica. Going for a short walk to clear my head. Back soon. Once outside, I hurried next door where Thomas was waiting with our neighbor Jim and a plainclothes detective. The moment I saw my son, alive and well, I broke down, embracing him fiercely. "I'm so sorry, Dad," Thomas said, his voice choked with emotion. I had no idea what she was doing, none at all. After our emotional reunion, Detective Martinez explained the plan. "We have enough for an arrest based on the evidence you've gathered, Mr. Reynolds. But we'd like to get a confession on record if possible. Are you comfortable with confronting her while wearing a wire?" I agreed without hesitation. The detective fitted me with a small recording device and gave me instructions on how to lead the conversation to incriminating admissions. Thomas would remain outside with backup officers, ready to enter when signaled. "Remember, stay calm and keep her talking," Detective Martinez advised. "Your safety is the priority. If at any point you feel threatened, use the code word Eleanor, and we'll come in immediately." I returned to the house, my heart racing but my resolve firm. Jessica was in the kitchen, seemingly preparing dinner. "Good walk?" she asked absently. "Very illuminating," I replied, my voice steady. "Jessica, we need to talk before I leave tomorrow." She turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "There's nothing more to discuss, Ansel. The arrangements are made." "I think there is," I said, sitting at the kitchen table. "For instance, we should discuss how you've been emptying the bank accounts Thomas set up for household expenses." Her expression froze momentarily before she recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been managing our finances as Thomas would have wanted. And the house sale? Is that also what Thomas would have wanted? Selling the home he loved just weeks after his supposed death?" Jessica's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What do you mean, supposed death?" "I mean the death you invented," I said calmly. "Thomas isn't dead, Jessica. He never was." For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. Then her expression hardened. "You're confused, Ansel. Grief does that to people your age. Maybe we should call that social worker again." "I'm not confused," I replied, removing my phone from my pocket and placing it on the table. "In fact, I've been very methodical, recording our conversations, finding Thomas's hidden laptop, discovering your emails to Brian, planning your new life together with money stolen from my son." Jessica's face drained of color. "You've been snooping through my private things? That's illegal." "Not as illegal as faking someone's death to steal their assets," I countered. "Or forging property transfer documents. Or committing insurance fraud." She took a step toward me, her shock transforming into anger. "You have no proof of anything. It's the word of a confused old man against mine. Who do you think people will believe?" "They'll believe evidence, Jessica. The emails, the financial records, the recordings of you and Brian planning to sell this house out from under my son while he's working overseas." "Give me that phone," she demanded, lunging toward the table. I pulled it back quickly. "It's already backed up to the cloud. Destroying it won't help you." Jessica's composure completely shattered. "Fine. Yes, Thomas is alive. So what? He abandoned me here to play nursemaid to his pathetic father while he gallivants around the world. I deserve better. I deserve a life, not to be trapped in this house with a geriatric burden." "So you decided to steal everything and run off with Brian?" I asked, keeping her talking as instructed. "We had plans before you moved in and ruined everything," she spat. "Thomas was going to sell this place so we could buy our dream home. Then he insisted on moving you in, and suddenly our plans were on hold indefinitely. And faking his death. Was that Brian's idea or yours?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "Mine. Brian wasn't sure it would work, but I knew Thomas had told his company to route all his communications through me because of the time difference. It was simple to intercept his calls and emails, tell everyone he was dead, and start liquidating assets before anyone caught on." "What about the memorial service?" "Those people were Thomas's friends and colleagues. Most thought it was just a remembrance since the body was overseas," she said dismissively. "A few were in on it. Carl knows Brian from college. He played along for a cut of the insurance money." I shook my head in disbelief at her callousness. "And you were just going to disappear? What about when Thomas eventually came home?" By then, I'd be gone with everything of value. Let him try to prove what happened from across the world with no money and no documentation. As for you, she sneered, you were the biggest complication. I couldn't just throw you out without questions being asked. But a grieving widow needing a fresh start? Everyone understands that. You won't get away with this, Jessica, I said firmly. Her expression turned menacing as she moved toward a drawer. Actually, I think I will. If you have recordings and evidence as you claim, I need to make sure they never reach Thomas. She pulled out a large kitchen knife, and my blood ran cold. Eleanor, I said clearly, speaking the code word. Jessica looked confused for a split second before the front and back doors burst open simultaneously. Thomas and several police officers rushed in. Jessica froze, the knife still in her hand, as Detective Martinez identified himself. Jessica Anderson, put down the knife and place your hands behind your head, he commanded. You're under arrest for attempted fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit theft, and now threatening behavior with a deadly weapon. The look on Jessica's face when she saw Thomas standing there alive was one I'll never forget. Shock, rage, and then defeat washed over her in rapid succession as the officers handcuffed her. Thomas, she stammered. I can explain everything. It was Brian's idea. All of it. I was under pressure. Save it for your lawyer, Jessica, Thomas said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I heard everything. As the police led Jessica away, reading her rights, Thomas put his arm around my shoulders. Dad, I'm so sorry. I had no idea what was happening. If you hadn't figured this out, I patted his hand. It's okay, son. Engineers are natural problem solvers, and no one outsmarts your old man. For the first time in what felt like forever, we both managed to smile. The aftermath of Jessica's arrest was both challenging and healing. The legal proceedings moved relatively quickly given the overwhelming evidence against her. Brian was arrested the same night at his apartment, caught literally in the act of packing Jessica's valuables into his car. Carl and 2 others involved in the fraudulent memorial service faced charges as well. Jessica eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence, admitting to fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit grand theft, and attempted elder abuse. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Brian received a similar sentence for his role in the scheme. The first few weeks after the arrests were the hardest. Thomas was consumed by guilt and self-recrimination. I should have seen it, he said repeatedly, as we sat in the living room that had been the stage for so much deception. There were signs. Her excessive spending, her resistance to you moving in, the way she always wanted to handle all communications while I was away. Thomas, I said firmly, manipulators are skilled at what they do. Jessica showed you exactly what you wanted to see, a loving, supportive wife. You can't blame yourself for believing in the person you married. But I left you vulnerable, he insisted. If you hadn't been so resourceful, I squeezed his shoulder. But I was, and we're both okay. The recovery of finances and property was straightforward since Jessica's schemes were exposed before she could complete them. The forged property transfer was invalidated, and the funds she had moved to separate accounts were returned. The company Thomas worked for was horrified by the situation and offered him a month of paid leave to sort out personal matters. During that month, Thomas and I rebuilt our relationship, having longer and more honest conversations than we had in years. We discussed everything from his whirlwind romance with Jessica to his career aspirations to what we both wanted for the future. I'm declining the next overseas assignment, Thomas told me over breakfast one morning. I want to be present here, for you and for myself. Don't make decisions based solely on me, I cautioned. Your career is important. This isn't just about you, Dad, he assured me. This experience has shown me what matters. I was chasing promotions and bonuses at the expense of real connections. I don't want to live that way anymore. As for our living situation, we came to a new arrangement. Thomas helped me find a comfortable 1-bedroom apartment in a senior living community just 3 miles from his house. Close enough for regular visits, but with independence for both of us. You'll have your own space, social activities, and no stairs to worry about, Thomas said as we toured the facility. But you'll have dinner at my place at least twice a week. Non-negotiable. The healing process wasn't linear. There were days when anger dominated my thoughts, not just toward Jessica, but toward a society that often dismisses the elderly as burdensome or expendable. The way Jessica had used my age against me, assuming I would be too confused or powerless to fight back, stung deeply. Rather than let that anger fester, I channeled it productively. I connected with an elder rights advocacy group and began sharing my story at community centers and retirement homes, warning others about potential financial abuse and exploitation by family members. Trust your instincts, I would tell my audiences. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything, keep copies of important papers, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Age brings wisdom, not weakness. Thomas found his own path to healing as well. After finalizing his divorce from Jessica, he took time to focus on himself before dating again. When he eventually met Laura, a kind pediatric nurse, he proceeded with thoughtful caution rather than rushing into a new relationship. The first time he brought Laura to meet me at my new apartment, I was impressed by her genuine warmth and the respectful way she engaged with me as a person, not an obligation or burden. "Your father is remarkable," she told Thomas while I pretended not to hear from the kitchen. The way he handled that whole situation shows such strength and clarity of mind. Over the next year, our lives settled into a new normal. My apartment became truly home, decorated with Eleanor's china, displayed proudly in a cabinet, family photos on every surface, and my chess table positioned by the window for games with new friends or Thomas during his frequent visits. Thomas and Laura's relationship deepened, and I was genuinely happy for them. She brought out the thoughtful, grounded qualities in my son that I had always valued most. The most important lesson from our ordeal wasn't about betrayal or deception, but about resilience and the true nature of family. Family isn't defined by legal documents or even by blood, but by actions, by showing up for each other, by fighting for one another's dignity and well-being. One evening, as Thomas, Laura, and I shared dinner on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset, Thomas raised his glass in a toast. "To family," he said simply. "The real kind, the real kind," Laura and I echoed, clinking glasses. Later, after they had left, I sat alone watching the last light fade from the sky. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything, not just material possessions, but my son, my dignity, my sense of purpose. Instead, I had emerged stronger, wiser, and paradoxically more at peace than before. The truth always finds its way to the surface eventually. Sometimes it just needs a little help from someone who refuses to be underestimated. So what about you? Have you ever had to stand up against someone who underestimated you because of your age or circumstances? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story of justice served resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that we're never too old to fight for what's right. Thank you for listening. And remember, wisdom and experience are superpowers, not weaknesses.